Well, good afternoon, good evening, my friends. I'm Erica Lukes. I was happy to be here on UFO Classified every Friday night. I love doing this show and having such wonderful people get into chat and I mean, you guys are my people. This is so cool. We have a cohesive and a wonderful group of people out there. And I want to thank Alien Girl, yay, Amy, Scott, Sparky Lady, all of you, Jim. Spake Flaps, interest. I just anyway. I love you guys. So thank you for being here, and I want to thank Peter for doing everything that he does to get word out about my show on social media. I appreciate that. Running a business full time and then archiving and trying to do research, which I seem to actually spend more time doing. I've got to kind of behave myself, but it takes a lot of time, and so it takes a whole group of like-minded people to actually get out there and help support each other. And I appreciate all of you. You guys are great examples of doing that. And I also want to just say that I love the way that you are all very thoughtful and dedicated about research, the way you're asking questions, which we all should ask questions. As you know, through my personal experiences, I have learned the hard way that just because somebody is nice doesn't necessarily mean they're giving you all of the information. And in fact, most of the time, they could be very adept at steering information just to lead you on a little, with a little carrot down a rabbit hole and keep you, oh, but the data's coming, I'm transparent, yada, yada, yada. And at the end of the day, 10 years later, 30 years later, you're back to next to nothing, just anecdotal tales that can't be backed up and all of that good stuff. And hey, Renee and Lord Ludicrous, thanks for joining E4. I hope all of you guys are having a wonderful week. And Steve, I see you in there as well. And Steve's Aquatics. I want to thank Mario for always helping here. He's here every week without fail. And to know that I have that support from somebody is really, it's been a cool thing over the years. And I've needed that through all the different twists and turns I've taken in my life. Tonight, I am really privileged again to bring on somebody to my show that is, in my opinion, the world's foremost historian and archivist on the topic. I'm sure that he could be completely embarrassed.
Yeah, I am.
Well, I don't care. You got to own it.
I think I'm going to shrink away and hide somewhere now.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm wondering where you're going to hide between that pile of books and the other pile of
Well,
stuff.
there aren't many places to hide. I mean, just to be on your show tonight, I climbed out of my coffin. I mean, you heard the old stories about the ideal occupations for people working towards nighttime. There's only two that are really appropriate: astronomers and vampires, and I chose the vampire.
Vlad the Impaler. Is that it?
Yep, that's power.
That's good. And so you can
yeah.
you can play right into those myths that, keep all of us entertained with regard to, and that's something that we haven't heard.
That's history, and that's what I'm all about, history.
You are about history. And I want to say Steve's Aquatics was just saying, Barry, I would love to help you organize that room, but I will tell you, where everything is in that room.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, it's just amazing.
It's not a matter of organization. It's a matter of space. You run out of space, and you really don't have too many options on organizing. It has to go here and push it in that space there that's empty, and then those spaces get filled, and you're running out of more spaces. So you're stuck. I need a mansion.
You do. I mean, and honestly, like the fact that you don't have one for your archive, like seriously, you need one, but you're so busy just doing the dirty work for all of us so we can make sure we're learning the history or preserving the history for future generations that get into this subject. I just think it's just amazing. And I love that. And I mean, I can call you every day and say, Barry, can you get me this? Can you get me that? And I think, and you always do. And so, oh my gosh, I just think it's amazing. And I wish we had a combined space where we could put all of our things, because I know that people could look at MySpace and say, "Oh, I'm a hoarder," and things, but it's because we're collecting things and we don't have funding to put things in a big space,
Well,
which I
the
wish we
important thing to
did.
realize is that I think everybody who collects on the subject has something unique. Everybody, regardless. You might have duplicates of Kehoe books and Ruppelt books all over the place, but it seems like everyone has something that nobody else has. And that's why it's important to network and archive with others and make sure we know about these holdings so that we can, if needed, access very rare information. So we're doing that. We're in the process of doing it. We have a program now where Dave Mahler, who a lot of people know, is trying to get both funding and facilities to create a very large UFO archive in Albuquerque,
Right.
sort of a rival to Roswell. Roswell is mainly a one-trick pony. It's that case and little else. Although they do have a library, but it's limited. But Dave's trying to create something that's not so limited. He's absorbing collections. He's taken over the Kufos NICAP files uh, since sometime last year. Oh no, the year before. And he's building on it all the time. He has people beginning to contribute large amounts of information to him. For example, Philip Mantle in England, who a lot of people know, uh, was an investigator over there for many years, and he was involved in the infamous alien autopsy story, which is quite a tale. But he's promised Dave to send his archive across the Atlantic, and Dave will take care of it forever. And also Antonio Junias, who many people might remember as a researcher back in the 70s and 80s, and he worked out of New York. He contributed his collection to Dave, and I think the final count on that was something like 95 boxes that ended up in Dave's garage, and he had to sort it all out somehow. I don't think he's done yet, but it's quite an amazing holding for foreign language literature. And that's the idea to encompass the world, to have things from everywhere accessible in these areas. Uh, I'm an advocate of having archives in different countries, not just one overriding thing necessarily. Every country should have something that absorbs their cultural interest in aerial phenomena and UFO topics, and that'd be great. But we're not there yet, so
Right.
we just have to work with what we have.
Well, I think, too, that's a great, it's an important point because I know that, for me, not having the funding to travel to Dave's, and things, I think it's important to have different places across the country where you have, special an archive set up so people can have specific holdings, and then like all of us have been doing, we're working together to exchange information and to support each other's archiving process. And I think that's really critical because I know there are a lot of things in Utah or in the Western region that I'm ideally hoping will come here because I have, as you know, a commercial space, a large commercial space that I'm in the process of turning into a place where people can come in, like a museum and a research facility and do research. I will be starting my lecture series again and bringing speakers in, and that will be a real central thing here in Utah in the Intermountain area. And I think that's really it's exciting for me. I've got
Yeah,
a few people like yourself who are helping me, and we're going to do some great things with this,
yeah,
and we're all
yeah,
supporting each other. I think that's great.
yeah. The important thing about what you're doing is that, going back to the idea of placing archives in different regional locations, you have Utah. I don't think there's anywhere else in Utah that specializes in archiving UFO information. Maybe I think the university, Utah University, uh, the Frank Salisbury collection. That's uniquely UFO and all, and then that was contributed some years ago, and it's available, but you have to follow the strictures of the university. Uh, with you, I think it might be a little more open if you create something large enough to be able to create a reference area, like a library and archive combined, where people can just walk in and talk about the subject and access the information. But that always needs money. It needs, as I mentioned before, space, and when you can get those, when you can get a regular flow of income that you can put into that, then you can go pretty far.
When I
But
think right, and absolutely, and I think the one thing that I will say I'm really fortunate about is that I actually do have a commercial space that is large enough
hmm,
to, and is a great place to store documents and things to keep them safe, and it's a great, I mean, it's a great location. People walk in here right now because it's in my Pilates studio, and they're tell us about the UFOs. I mean, there's not a day that goes by, I
yeah,
don't have clients that are in here and there. In fact, I had somebody walk in yesterday to find out about Pilates, and then he went off on UFOs and everything that he knew about things, and it was just like, okay. I mean, it's really really cool to kind of create this space where people are coming in and they feel comfortable and they're sharing stories about things, especially here in Utah. People that come to the studio are very involved in the community,
hmm.
both from a professional standpoint, business, definitely a lot of top business leaders here that come in, and it's a really exciting thing and a way to reach people, and I love it. So
Oh, yeah.
I'm so excited.
The setup you have is interesting because someone can go in there and sit down and read among all that in strange and odd and unusual material, and then uh, can't sit too long and read. You get up and do exercises a few feet away.
I know. Get on the rack.
Right, right. You exercise your body and your mind.
You're going to read Roger Lear, 10 spankings for you on the rack. And I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
yeah, yeah. And
But
and also you'll have a video set up as well, audio video, where you can show things and display old movies and segments from television shows that are long gone that have been saved, and it'd be great to have a setup like that. You could have a field day advertising it with all
yeah,
the
no, it's
possibilities.
and I mean it's fun because I've been doing this here for years. I mean, over gosh, I mean I've been in this space for 10 years, and I've had meetings here almost, that whole time, and had I've had different speakers come in and talk about local things, but then also, and thank you, Scott, for the super sticker. Thank you. But I've also, brought in people, and it's a great, it's just a great space, and it's very open. Like I said, I've been involved in the business community here in Utah for 20 years, and so I've got a lot of wonderful connections. And then when I go back and look at my familial connections, I was telling you this the other day, and I posted something on Twitter. But my grandfather, his best friend, and somebody that I was over at his house almost every day during my childhood, was Dr. Everett Cooley, who was an historian and one of the first people that started the archiving process for Utah, and then eventually moved to the University of Utah Special Archives and created that wonderful archives up there where you can see Dr. Frank Salisbury's work. And so I look back at all these connections that I have, and I'm just like, this is so cool. I
Mm,
love it, and I think that's really kind of important. To have not just the kind of the UFO thing, but to have a broader, a broader reach and connection, and also understanding with regard to specifically Utah, the Navajo, the Ute, all of the Native American history, the history of the settlers here, and different places where people have alleged that there were stories of a specific thing that at the end of the day, when you really dig in and do your research, that can't be verified. And I
Mm.
think that's, so I'm like really seriously excited about just the possibilities and all of this. I kind of went off on a little thing, but
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we were hamstrung in the past because of lack of funds, lack of facilities. There didn't seem to be much interest among the academics as to storing the subject, preserving it for future generations. They felt it was frivolous and useless, and you heard any number of comments from people in the past to that effect. But things have changed now. I think. Oddly enough, 2017 has generated a great deal of interest among new people, younger people, who can begin to pick this up and take it over and all. We just have to make sure that they don't go down rabbit holes with what they're doing. And there's a lot of that going on.
yeah, there is. I want to address that in a second. At first, I want to just mention a comment or a question from E4, and this is a great question. Are you wanting to turn this commercial space into a profitable enterprise or as a hobby? And I mean, this is, I am in the process of setting up a nonprofit, and so anything that is donated to the nonprofit is tax deductible, and everything that is going into the nonprofit is going to be used to buy printers, to buy scanners, to house, all of these things to give me and us that are involved in this the flexibility to say, okay, there's a holding here, then I have the ability to get in my car or get on a plane and go get that. Because a lot of times, as you know, when you are involved in getting other people's files, there is a fee involved, and if they don't charge you for their files, you've got to go, like with the Druffle files, they graciously donated those to me, but I had to secure plane tickets, a U-Haul, take time off of work. It was a very lengthy process, and that is something that I took out of my own pocket. And I will say as well, with the show that I'm doing, I'm just breaking even now on this show. And so I've never, and maybe I should look at this as something that's profitable, but I'd just be happy to have the funding to make an archive that is spectacular and to keep this show going and being able to reach more people. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, unfortunately, in these days, it takes a great deal of money to maintain just about anything, food, lodging, whatever, and prices have gone up, and it puts more of a strain on people wanting to donate. But there are a lot of very rich people out there looking to do something with their money, and I don't see anything much better with the UFO topic than investing in creating an archive and building them up. Because if you think about it, the papers and monographs, books, everything that we have is a physical manifestation
right.
of the subject. We don't have UFOs. We don't have flying saucers. We just have the information about them. And if we're going to learn anything from that information, we have to preserve the physical part of it. And that's what this is all about. It's not just preserving it, but it's duplicating it, making sure that what we preserve survives in elsewhere so that it'll never get lost.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's so important. And yeah, E4, thank you for the wonderful question, because I think that deserves to be answered. And I know that people don't understand, Barry, like when you and Jan have done what you have done and traveled all over and spent a lot of time in different archives, the National Archives. You've gone to different people's homes, and you've worked really, really hard for decades to make sure that if somebody's maybe on the edge, wife is gonna toss something in the in
Yeah,
the in the
that's a
trash
big
bin.
problem sometimes.
Right. I mean, so there's so many factors involved, in all of this. And then, like with Philip Mantle's archive, you've got to think about the transportation, like getting all of that over here to America. That's not exactly a cheap prospect, especially as of late. So there are lots of considerations to take. But at the end of the day, for me, for you, I know for the people listening, this is an important endeavor because this is a history that is about so much more than just UFOs
Mm,
and the pursuit of extraterrestrial life. There's a really deep, there are deep overtones of political influence, of religious influence. There's so many things of belief systems, of the way people can be manipulated, of specific, people that have decade after decade used the topic for their own gain. I mean, there's so much. It is such a rich, rich subject.
yeah, well, belief is a big motivator in this subject, but I think in some ways it can be very destructive too, because it will send people down rabbit holes and uh, perhaps waste a lot of time. Uh, we're trying to keep this out of a belief-based system and just strictly adhering to information that's reported and information that can be tracked to an original source so it's not tainted by later retellings and rewritings. And if we can maintain that level of preservation on the subject, I'll be very happy. But there's just too much nonsense going on now that it's very disconcerting.
And so I know that we've got a couple really, really cool things that we're going to talk about that nobody knows about that you've been researching for a long time. And I'm excited to talk about that. And thank you, Drew, for the super sticker. I want to just say, when you're looking at what's taking place now, you've been through a lot. You've been through, a decade of MJ12. You've been through all of, everything, and you've seen the way people behave, and you've been very steadfast in your resolve. Okay, show me the evidence.
Hmm.
I mean, very no nonsense. And so when you look at the current climate of the UFO field, what are your thoughts?
Uh, there are some good developments, but there's a lot of concerning developments in reporting, and it's not really unique. The things that go on now that are bothersome have happened in the past. Different details, but the same things keep coming up, and it makes people think about the subject. Reasonable people, I would say, think about it in a very negative way, and they don't want to get involved, and they're worried about it feeding them false information in their opinions on it. So we want to get away from that and get back where we were in the past with stripping away all of that uh, odd attachment to the phenomenon that people put on it. I noticed recently that there was a MUFON conference, and one of the papers given was about Valiant Thor. Now, probably a lot of people don't know about Valiant Thor, but I remember it. I remember it when I was a kid, and first time I heard about it was when it turned up on television, TV talk shows back around 1964, 65 or so, where an old name in the subject, Frank Stranges, had written a book called Stranger at the Pentagon. And sort of reminds you what's going on now, but that was over 50 years ago. But his premise was that there was a person working at the Pentagon who was a Venusian, and his name was Valiant Thor, and he provided so-called evidence that Thor was there. He had a photograph, a profile photograph showing a regular-looking person that he claimed was an alien. And it went on television. People watched it, and they sort of chuckled about it and thought it was kind of goofy. But that stuck with me over the years. Probably partly because I was a kid and I was impressionable about those things. But uh, someone just recently did a research paper on the origins of Valiant Thor. And I'm saying, okay, well, maybe that was a story that should have died back then, but now it's taking up research time, trying to get to the bottom of who Valiant Thor was. And it was just very little basis for it. It was invented by Frank Stranges, and he wrote a book, and the book came out, and it was interesting, but didn't prove anything.
And I mean, I think that's a typical thing with the UFO subject. It's like you've got people that are, I mean, maybe new to the subject or are just, well, delusional. I don't know. I mean, they glom onto these stories, and it's like, oh, Valiant Thor. Well, that could have been a real thing. And I remember hearing, about that when I first got involved with MUFON. It's like Valiant Thor, and I
Hmm.
mean, I'm just like, okay, well, this is awkward and a strange tale, and you can go down when I can walk into the library and just look at so many books and magazines and tales of complete crap.
Hmm.
It's just in fact I've got, like I've been telling you, just I've been looking at these, like flying
Oh,
saucers,
yeah,
I mean, just these, the
right,
Soviet
yeah.
Union research spree, blah 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 blah.
Ray
And then,
Palmer, yeah.
yep, and then this is cute. That guy's cute. Not really at all.
Ray Palmer was one of the great rumor mongers of all time,
Right. And then,
and Gray Barker, right?
right. And then this is one of my personal favorites. I love, anything that glorifies Hitler.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That
Sweet.
was what that looks like. It's right out of the '60s.
Yeah, he was a liberal, I'm sure.
Yeah,
But yes, I mean, it's really fascinating to, I don't know. I just love this. It's crazy.
yeah. It's a rich history. It's fun, but if you're looking for seriousness out of it, you've got to cut a lot of that out.
Right. And I think people, unfortunately, it's like you get into this, and then you're being sold, you think you're new agey and you're loving light, and you're being talked to by the Pleiadians and things like that. And then you just go down this rabbit hole where you really are being programmed,
Hmm.
in my opinion. It's like you've got to throw God in there, you've got to throw the apocalypse in there, you've got to, angels, demons, big one, all of these conspiracy theories that really, at the end of the day, are great platforms for specific organizations or groups of people to use to do the group kind of mind think. But at the end of the day, how does that, affect the true study of the topic? And I've got to ask you this, do you think that should be separated, or do you think historians need to be aware of all of these things that go into the history of the topic?
Separated? You mean like if you create a reference library, you section this stuff off here, and
So I think, my from what I have seen, a lot of people are either they're looking for the one perfect case,
hmm,
and they're discarding personal correspondence, which
hmm,
is really, in my opinion, very telling about a lot of things. And I mean, I see people kind of discounting the history of the subject with regard to people that were, like, say, let's take NICAP, for example. You've got people like Barry Goldwater and people that were very affluent in specific political circles and could have potentially used this in, for their purposes. And so, do you think that we should separate that, or should we be giving this information to people as a whole and letting
uh,
them digest that? Does that make sense?
well, I think, yeah, I think you can give people information, but with qualifications. I when I was with Mass MUFON back in the '80s, one thing we did, I would always put a show on with videotapes of documentaries that were all over the place back then. The history, no, this was even before the History Channel. They were on other networks, and they were very common, so it was easy to find them and record them. And what we wanted to do as an instruction to investigators, old and new, was to air these, and then while I was airing them, I would stop the recorder and point out something about what they were saying that, oh, that's not true, and here's why, and then just continue on. So we would fill up a program like that with one documentary after another, and I shouldn't even call them documentaries. I should call them pseudo documentaries. And that was received very well by people. They thought, if I watched that and someone didn't tell me about it, I would have believed it. And those shows loaded up with garbage constantly. There was a little bit of useful information, but most of the time it was trash. So it was an instructive tool for people to learn from. And in that respect, you're using it to a positive purpose.
I think that's good, and I think it's important, and I think there's so much, like, for me, having, I've started trying in a specific area when I was with MUFON or when I was researching on my own, and then stepping back, and I kept learning things and then stepping back and stepping back. And sometimes when you look at things from a bird's eye view, you can, see these patterns and connections and see ulterior motives. And then I think it's a little bit clearer, the kind of path that you need to take and what you need to step over, and
Hmm.
things that Lord knows I've stepped in it. I mean, let's talk about that little magical frog.
Yeah, yeah. Now you see History Channel and other networks coming up with new programming and documentaries, so called, that are just injecting new weirdness into the whole debate. Things like Skinwalker Ranch, for example, one of your favorite topics. Uh, there's some pretty lurid stuff in there that is a bit hard to accept. And I think a lot of people see it that way, but it appeals to a wide audience. It has a viewership, and whatever they offer as information, it's digested by a lot of people and taken very seriously. But there are issues there that need to be fixed.
And so what would you think are some of the main issues that need to be addressed?
With those documentaries in general, just have someone to arbitrate what goes into them first before they ever air. It's apparent they don't uh, use consultants who are very, very familiar with the subject. They'll take anyone who calls themselves an expert, and that happens so often. Uh, Anyone names themselves that. There's no credentials, there's no training, there's no university degree for it, but nevertheless, they call themselves experts. And the media is all ready to believe it. They don't care. You're an expert? Okay, you're hired. And then they put all kinds of nonsense into these shows, unscreened. There are people in the subject who've been around for a longer time who are more familiar with the topic than the ones they hire, and they could fix this. They could repair some of that damage, but it just doesn't seem to be a great effort to want to do that by the media. The media wants ratings. They're not as concerned, I think, with facts and information as they are with just scoring points. And you
And
score points with sensation.
well, or crap. I mean, let's, okay, how many guys do we need to launch a rocket? Okay. I mean, it's I don't know. I mean, if I were writing some of these shows, I would think I mean, I guess that's cool. Anyway, they've got, I mean, they're season after season, and that's great. But I mean, I always think, when you've got a topic to me that is so interesting and so layered, there's so many layers here, and there's so many cool places to go and so many sexy places to go. It's not, if you had a production team that had it just that knew what they were doing, they could create a show that was really spectacular and actually giving people information that was worthwhile. And I think it is too bad that there isn't a production team that is really thoroughly wanting to do that and give people support that are actually doing all of the work. Because to me, in my mind, I've got this, a perfect show, showcasing people that are doing the work, and that's cool. because the things I can find in your library are amazing. But again, it's like people get lazy and they want to see a guy with a gun, and they want to see, I mean, for whatever reason, the former governor of Utah and things, and so it's just like it's really.
Yeah, part of the problem with television production is they're constrained by different things relative to the business. They're constrained by time, and they're constrained by budget. So what that results in is that they learn of a person who knows something about a topic they're wanting to air. So they'll contact that person, usually by an email, and say, we need as much information as possible on this topic. Can you get it to us by tomorrow? And you want to help, but at the same time, it's almost an impossible request.
Well, and then at the same time, it's like they're not offering to pay you for your time and the
No.
50 decades that you've researched things, and it's just like, I mean, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it is.
sometimes they'll offer something depending upon the degree to which you supply information, but most of the time it's like, they might pay for a FedEx mailing or something, and that's about it.
And I mean, it's amazing when you look at some of the production, like the producers with specific channels and things, executive producers, and how much money they're pulling in. It's pretty spectacular,
Yeah,
and
yeah, they're doing fairly well on with income, and all these shows are, they're watched quite frequently. They're not ratings busters by any means on cable, but they still get a fair enough audience that they can continue to pump these documentaries out and put them on just the same way that they've done all the previous ones, slap happy.
well, I mean, people are they're lapping it up, and I mean it's all great until you actually have to produce evidence. And I think for me, my big thing with a certain show is you come onto the scene and you say that you're going to be forthright with evidence. You're going to allow people to see the data. You're going to not do things the way you've done before, and every single thing that has been stated over the years has been that has not been proven to be true. But yet there's so many people that are just happy to have, um, I mean, just somebody acknowledge them, and then they think they're cool, and they'll go out and they'll be their social media bulldog. It's like, give me a break. I mean,
Hmm.
don't we want better for this subject?
Yeah, yeah. I'll give you a couple of examples using Skinwalker Ranch because you're knowledgeable about that much more than I am. You live out there and you've dealt with it. So I can just speak as a viewer watching television, watching the presentation, and just noting things that uh, are rather odd in some of the claims that are made. One was I had watched an episode where uh, folks are sitting around a table and they're uh, running a recording of a night scene, and suddenly there's a big flash, and everybody in the room lit up like, oh, wow, what's that? And they're looking at each other, and the eyes are bugging out, and the jaws are dropping, and they're quite astonished by it. Um, and it was a very brief flash. It was a night vision image, and you see this big poof, and then it disappears in an instant. Um, I was puzzled by the astonishment there because I'm not an expert by any means, but I am an amateur astronomer. I've been since I've been a kid. And when I saw that, I remembered reading about iridium satellites being put up. And they had a unique feature about them. Their panels on the outside of the satellite were quite reflective. And that there was a whole industry of observation of iridium satellites where the panels reflected sunlight in such a way that they could predict when you could see the reflections on the surface of the Earth. There are sites out there now that still do that. So, and the feature of them was, of course, you look up in the sky, suddenly you see a big flash, and then it's gone, and you don't see it again. Sometimes they flash twice. That's been noted with iridium satellites. So I'm watching this episode, and I'm saying, iridium satellite. Is there anything there that wasn't like an iridium satellite? Not to me. It didn't appear that way. And but they didn't seem to consider that. And I know, there were scientists there. Some of them were skilled in their fields, but that wasn't mentioned. And I thought that was strange. That if you're going to study anomalous information like that, anomalous sightings, um, you shouldn't jump to conclusions about it being a genuine unknown, as they call it, or whatever that means. That there might be some exotic interpretation of that, instead of considering something more mundane, like an iridium satellite. That I would have thought of that, and I would have said, wait a minute, don't jump to conclusions about it. But they appeared to do that. They appeared to jump to conclusions, and that was put on television, so it was presented as mysterious. It shouldn't have been.
And I guess at the end of the day, if that's all they have, then that says something.
You have to be concerned if they take spontaneous temporary events like that and inflate them beyond what they really were. I'll give you another example, another show uh, where they had a drone mounted with a camera, and they send up the drone, and they want to take 3D images of the landscape, as if somehow there's something about the landscape that's odd and creating strange anomalous effects. So that's fair enough. They mapped the place, and the drone came back, and the data was entered, and they sit down and look at the landscape, and they were able to rotate the landscape to see a panorama, and they could control every bit of movement on it. But as they did that, there was some sort of a strange effect that it almost looked like smoke or smokestack of black dark matter coming up from the ground. And they paused for a minute and thought it was really odd. And I'm looking at it and I'm saying, it's all heavily pixelated, so it resembles these strange tendrils coming up, as if something about that particular spot in the landscape was odd. So I'm just continuing to watch, and they're continuing to note these effects here and there on the panorama. But um, one thing struck me during that, in that in one shot they had this effect coming up from the ground, and then they start turning the camera so that you're looking in other directions. And as the camera turned, that spot didn't stay over the area of the land that it appeared on in the first place, but it rotated with the camera
Oh,
and stayed on the same spot on the computer screen, the exact same spot. And that suggested to me it was a software issue. It was a problem with the software. And uh, was that considered? Well, I think they did, to a point, because they said they inquired of the people who provided the software and the information, and they said, well, they never heard of that before. Well, it was good enough for them. Well, the manufacturer didn't hear of it before, so that's anomalous. And they went as far as saying, I was shocked. I think, in fact, Travis Taylor was the one that offered this up. He suggested it was an alien portal. I said, what? Wait a minute. You haven't even established the anomalous nature of it yet, and ruled out other more mundane things, and they're calling these things possible portals by aliens. What the hell? What are they doing? Don't tell the public that, because the public is very suggestible about those things. But again, ratings, that gets people to watch, and that's all they were worried about.
what I mean, isn't that I mean, and like I said, if they had anything that was truly mind blowing, it would be on the, it would make international news. It
Oh
wouldn't
yeah, yeah.
be,
I mean,
you know,
if it was provable and factual and all that, everybody would love to see that because that would change the world. It
right.
would change reality and be very exciting. I'd like to see that, but uh, what's being offered up is like you know dishwater compared to champagne. It just isn't as good, and there's a lot of questions about it. It leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
But yet, and I think the thing that I think is so interesting too is to watch the fact that instead of like having humility and saying, okay, well, we don't know everything and we're open to suggestions. And if this isn't really, what we're seeing, then that's great. And this is something that is, this is unexplained and we're going to
Mm,
take our hits. It's like dying, on a cross and then creating a group of people that go out there and intimidate other people because they're asking questions. And I think that really is just kind of a um,
yeah.
strange process. And I think if I were doing, I mean, just if I were in charge of publicity for certain shows, I wouldn't be handling things in that regard. But
Yeah, I mean, when you encounter uh, uh, temporary, odd situations that you don't completely understand at first, what's called for is being sedate and to slow down and stop your imagination for a minute. The inclination when you see something odd is like, oh, you want to go to the extreme and say that's strange, that's odd. We can make something out of that. You have to be cautious about it first and just run it through a process of assessment where you're not fooling yourself in your conclusions. And then after a while, which TV doesn't allow for, because you have to do things quickly on television, get to conclusions, and before the commercial break, uh, uh, it just gives a wrong impression.
yeah, no, and I absolutely agree with that. And thank you for talking a little bit about that. And I think it's important because so many people that are interested or could be interested in the subject and they watch different things like that and they're getting sucked in to things and they're not asking critical questions and they're assuming because you've got, like I mentioned, the former governor or the attorney general or people like that on there, which I have to say we try to go to great lengths not to make this topic about politics. And
Mm,
unfortunately, here you go. You've got
mm,
politics involved. It's like, it's what is the point? Where are
mm,
the researchers coming in from all over the world? Where's the information that is being given to the public that was promised? And why isn't this transparent? Why is it hidden behind a paywall? Blah 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 blah
mm.
blah.
Well,
But
one of the things about television programming, and it's something that everybody grows up with television and watches things, and they're entertained to varying degrees about it. But the one thing that I like to do with programming, especially nonfiction programming, is to look for things that aren't right. You look for it in fiction movies too. You look for incongruities, anachronisms. You watch Star Wars. They're talking about uh, parsecs in a very inaccurate way, and that was the first Star Wars movie. And someone didn't understand the term, so it went out and it made them look like odd dummies for talking about it that way. Uh, but I like to look for mistakes in movies. I like to pick them apart. Some people are just they want the entertainment. I like to look and say, well, what are they doing there? What are they doing? Is that right? Does that belong there? And I like to just make a list of things like that out of films that uh, mistakes that they may let go by. And I guess that carries over into the UFO topic where I do that with the documentaries too. I just I can't help it. I have to pick these things apart to make sure that they're giving you a straight story. And most of the time, they're not. They're not. They're giving you a false image. They get some things right, but other things are terribly wrong.
The whole thing is just it's very interesting. But thank you for touching on that, because I think, with it, we have such a great capacity to influence the masses, and the masses. I mean, great. You either are entertained and you understand this is entertainment, as we know it was set up as an entertainment company, but or you understand there's real research, and they're two completely different things. And so I just think it would be amazing if people involved in specific things are a little bit more forthright about what the purpose is at the end of the day, because like you mentioned, there's so many holes and things that are being presented that, you know, it is what it
Well,
is.
the subject is had a career of game playing, unfortunately, and I think it's time to just stop that. Stop trying to emulate the craziness of the past and create a new reality about it. Talk about it in a factual way. If you lose some of the sense of sensation of it, so what? You're being correct. You're being factual. The hell with the sensation. That means that things aren't being told exactly the way they should be. If you resort to that as a tactic, and it's just too much of that with the media now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very interesting, and I love the way that I'm looking at people in chat, like saying, making really great comments, and I really appreciate this. We've got a really wonderful group of people that are actually, we all are asking questions. We're understanding that there's a problem with specific narratives, and we all at the end of the day think that this subject deserves the respect to find truth, and the truth that we've been given is not the truth. Truth is not the truth. Where have you
Hmm.
heard that before, Barry?
Yeah, Rudy Giuliani said so. Truth isn't truth, and that's a very disturbing comment because it implies that there's some degree of brainwashing, and you don't want that happening. But there's too many people that want to do that for their own benefits.
Right. And again, like I said, like you were mentioning as well just a second ago, it's like there are people that have kind of commandeered the subject and have been screwing with it for decades.
Hmm.
And it's the same group of people, and they're promoting the same things. They're just getting new mouthpieces to do that. And I think that's unfortunate for people that are coming into this that are excited about things, but hopefully we can create like a grassroots, effort where
Yeah.
we're getting information out, or we're asking people to ask questions to make sure that you're holding people uh, to fire, so to speak, so they're accountable for statements that they're making that they can't back up.
Well, one thing that really worries me now, as opposed to the past, we never had much money in the past. Just going along on thin budgets or non-existent budgets, or even shoveling our own money into it and losing in the long run. But now there seems to be some very wealthy people with a lot of money, and they seem to be kicking in more and more, I guess you could say, millions towards the topic in trying to create a new version of it, polished up, brand new presentation. But I worry about that money being used to cajole and to force uh, opinions and ideas that maybe shouldn't be there, and that's reflected, I think, in some of the TV presentations that we've had since about 2017. I've seen a lot about the Navy vessels with objects being seen in and around them in the past, and this is a particular line of thinking that some of those were said to be pyramidal or triangular shaped, and there was an optical effect that would explain those shapes in especially night vision photography, where out of focus lights would appear to have the shape of the opening of the lens instead of actually being shaped that way. It's a kind of funny bent triangle with the edges bulging outwards, and that precisely matched the aperture opening on these lenses, and even Congress had acknowledged that that was a problem. They pretty much explained that, but yet I see it being uh, doubled down. That the people who originally promoted it are saying no, it was a triangle or it was a pyramid, and they insist on that, despite the fact that I'm looking at the same film, I'm seeing every spot of light in there that's visible shaped the same way. That's out of focus. That's not a single object looking like that. The focus is poor, so everything looked like that could have been put out of focus. That's bothersome.
Right. Well, and I mean, I think, if you repeat something long enough, then it
Yep.
sinks in and you're
No,
going to believe it. And
no, that right out of World War II, they called it the big lie. I used that phrase when I did research on MJ12 because it was the same tactic being used. You keep hammering away on what they're trying to get across and repeating it and saying it loudly and getting it spread out as much as possible. Eventually, you're going to get an audience that'll accept that. It worked for Joseph Goebbels in the propaganda machine for the Nazis, and now it's spread across many other fields. It's a tried and true tactic, and it works because people allow themselves to be taken in by that. They don't have
and
time. They don't have time to assess information. You're probably in a workaday world, and you hear something, and well, that's great and all, but you don't have time to look into it.
right,
And then they just take that first impression and run with it instead of being more careful.
right.
Human nature. That's all it is.
Well, and I think now that we've got, there's so many with the internet, like I've mentioned so many times, we all know you can see, reports about what's being done to mine our data on Facebook and Twitter, and you've got the big tech giants like Peter Thiel and Palantir and some
Mm,
of these things where it's like you go to Facebook and know, hey, I'm going to do this little cute kind of a thing, and it's going to tell me what personality I am. But yet we do it, and then all of that data is going somewhere that can create a profile, which can create content, which can provide an echo chamber, which can give I mean, a person take a person down a rabbit hole that is pulling them away from logic and creating a really dangerous a system
mm.
belief system in them. And I think that that's something. And thank you, UFO John Doe. Nice to see you here. And thank you, Kali, for your super stickers. But it's, I mean, I think we need to be conscious of those things, and we need to understand that in the UFO world, that is, we're a prime target for that kind of stuff, because we come into this and we have sightings because we're potentially vulnerable. We want to find like-minded people, and we don't understand that they're really a group of people that are pariahs that are waiting to take advantage
Mm.
of us and manipulate belief systems. And we need to create a cohesive unit that understands that. And I think we are here. Like I said, this is kind of a grassroots effort with UFO Classified and some of the other uh, podcasts and shows that are coming out now that are asking really important questions. I think that's cool.
Right, right. Yeah, it's just I think the expertise issue is interesting because in the distant past, the subject came on the scene in 1947, and it carried on through the 50s and 60s, and I think through the whole time, it wasn't given much quarter in academic circles. That colleges, university, they didn't want to have anything to deal with it. They felt it was too much weirdness for them. It wasn't it wasn't a valid field of inquiry. I mean, you could look into individual stories and figure out perhaps what people thought they were seeing, and just write them off and leave them at that. They didn't see the topic of UFOs as something worthy of scientific investigation.
Right.
It was just dismissed out of hand. But What that did, I think it was a mistake, because what it did was that it left the topic, which is extremely popular. It was uh, very well known. I think the term UFO at one time was regarded as one of the top most recognized terms of anything in the English language. People knew what it was and what it meant, and it had a wide field of view for the public. And with the lack of academics in it, they it left it open for a lot of pseudo experts
Hmm.
to step in without credentials at all, without training, without any sort of background in real science, and to start to pontificate about it and make themselves sound intelligent. I saw uh, pieces of literature that were written up, and it was hilarious because you it'd be written in such complex, wordy language. It gave the impression of being intelligent, but it was just gibberish because the words didn't string together with any good meaning. It was just words thrown together to look intelligent. And there was a lot of that in the subject, and I kept them because I thought it was just a good example of the bad stuff that goes on. But it was a negative thing. It was terrible that it allowed too many people who thought they were experts to gain traction and get a loud voice. So that's what you're dealing with now to a large extent. It's better than it was, I think, probably before 2017, but it's still issues that have to be ironed out.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I just, yeah, I absolutely agree. There are issues that need to be ironed out, and yeah, I mean, this is all fascinating to me, and I think that you are a rational voice in a world of people that are con artists and delusional, and yet this can be, and it should be a genuine area of research,
Mm.
and so
Yeah,
you know
it's a reasonably decent area for people to study. You see something in the sky, you don't know what it is, you look into it and see what it might have been. And if it's explainable, then you put it down that way and move along. But if it's something that you can't quite pin down, you keep it around for further attention. Something maybe in the future will resolve it, and there'll probably be many UFO reports that'll never be resolved for one reason or another. The passage of time, the witnesses pass on. You never really know what's behind all the stories unless you were actually there experiencing the event with these people. But there were a small handful that seemed peculiar. Some of the ones that I've mentioned in the past.
Yes, which we will talk about right now because I think these are fascinating. And so we're going to talk. I'm just going to show this. Hang on, and we will get into some cases. And if you're thinking that these are worthy, then there is something there. So here we go.
Well, yeah, I'd say this. To me, uh, they were puzzling because they were reported in brief, and I didn't know all the facts about them, but nevertheless, they were of interest in the same way you'd want to solve a jigsaw puzzle. This one, air travelers report seeing flying saucer. You'll notice where that comes from, uh, in deepest Africa, and that was a story that it came up in a sort of a void in the history of this phenomenon. 1951 was not exactly a big year for UFO incidents. It followed a year where I think the first considerations of UFOs as perhaps alien visitations was offered up in the spring summer 1950. But 1951 things quieted down, so stories were few and far between. But then this one turns up, and some UFO literature had noted it, repeated it. There wasn't much press It was very lightly reported in the United States, little more so in Europe, but again, not much. So you see this tale about a flying saucer hovering over Mount Kilimanjaro, and that kind of generates things in the imagination. This is another one. This is a radio report some months later where they repeated the same story, and it was in the nation then of Tanganyika, which doesn't exist anymore. But people were in an airliner, and they had seen some strange object above Mount Kilimanjaro, some altitude above it, and that's pretty much all the U.S. press, the U.S. public learned about it. So you can just move along there if there's more. Okay, this is what they claim they saw. A really odd object. And nowadays it might be called a tic tac, but back then it was more of a torpedo, and or it might even look like a missile somewhat, but it didn't act like a missile. It hovered, and this is what the public, the witnesses in the aircraft had seen. Uh, and that was widely reproduced in UFO literature back in the day. It's largely forgotten now, but some of the better books on the subject included this usually as an example of the reasons why more attention should be paid to the phenomenon.
Wow.
So let me see.
Don't mean to move to the next.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Uh, I have the clip on this. One thing I did when I read that story, it was so piecemeal. I didn't have much information, so I noted a few bits of data that had been collected about it in the different books and periodicals back then. And it had mentioned that one of the witnesses was an American fellow named Ray Overstreet, and there were two people on the airliner that were seen to be taking pictures. One was a still photography, and the other one was Overstreet taking film. He actually had a movie camera. So the aircraft landed, and Overstreet was due to continue on from Kenya to South Africa. So he stayed on the flight, and nothing could be gathered from him about it. Whoever took the still photography, they disappeared, and nobody's seen them since. But he went on to South Africa, and almost immediately he started talking about it to the point where some of the newspapers there had heard about these rumors, and they were directed to him, and he actually arranged in his hotel room to screen the film after he had it developed down there super quick, and showed it to some of the reporters, and one of the reporters used a still camera, and it was projected on a white wall, not even a movie screen, but a white wall in the room, just so they could see it somehow. And a snapshot was taken, and this is an enlargement of the that part of the film, and you see a white dot. Basically, you can't see much of anything on it because, unfortunately, it came from newsprint, so it's going to be a bad copy anyway, and it was taken under trying circumstances as well. But this was the first time we were able to illustrate uh, with a real photograph what this sighting was all about, and you could see all of the aspects of it that the witnesses had seen originally. Now, uh, I think I can move along to the next one. Okay, this is a clip in context. It was reproduced in the Natal Mercury in Durban, South Africa. One of the things that was good about this particular clip was it went into some detail that we didn't have through the previous sources, and there was an astonishing bit of detail that I never heard of before, where the witnesses said that this object was hovering there, and then suddenly it dove down and actually passed in front of the mountain and moved off to the left of the mountain, and then eventually just shot up and disappeared. Now, unfortunately, that wasn't captured on the film. Um, the film itself is not available. That's been lost to history now. Uh, Overstreet is probably gone from the scene as well, but this was an effort to try to document that story more than the fragments we had, and that's the whole purpose of doing history, is to dig these things out and try to get to the bottom of them. It doesn't, I would say, not, it wouldn't qualify as much evidence of anything except that the incident happened and it was photographed. I mean, I don't know what you can make of a white dot in the sky, but according to the witnesses, it had shape. It had different shapes to it. It wasn't just that bullet shape. It was it had other. I think a half circle was described. It may be due to the different viewing points for whatever this was, but it provided a new perspective on that tale, and that's what I love doing in this, is filling out bits of history like that we just don't understand very well. Doesn't necessarily solve the subject, but it just fills in a lot more detail than we had previously.
Right.
So
That's so
I
cool.
think that was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's talk about this.
Okay, that's the original article uh, in
Wow.
Nairobi that was published about that. I obtained a copy of that from the British Library. They were kind enough to scan the newspaper, and that's where the story had first broken, and provided all of these details that we're familiar with now about it.
Wow.
So, and that wasn't easy to find. It was hard to find a South African paper that archived that far back. And fortunately, the British Library had it. Now, there is a story that another paper carried that, and they may have carried a different image than what this one did, but I haven't been able to pin that down yet. So that's another goal I have on this UFO report.
What I mean, like, and this is what I love, like talking to you all the time. It's like you just have, I mean, you're such a wealth of knowledge, and these, I mean, who would ever in a million years think to have this clip, to have done the work to find this particular clip, or anything that we've just seen? You,
Well, if I
you're a
know,
rarity.
I mean, this was to have provided background on the story, and if there's something on a story that with this background that I don't know about, I want to find it.
So
I want
cool.
to see where it is and find out. You might have to wait a long period of time. I did wait a long time on this. Wasn't easy to find a paper, but I had to pin it down to the date and the particular issues of that. And the Nairobi paper is rather obscure. There are other ones I'm looking for in a similar vein like that, and other stories over in Africa,
So
and they're
amazing.
really curious. I mean, one of them was said to have been an incident that was viewed by thousands of people over at Tenanarive, Madagascar, and that was in 1954. But I
Wow.
have yet to find a Madagascar newspaper that carried it, and it's probably not in English. But I don't care. I just want to see where that came from.
That is so cool. I mean, I don't know. I think that you are amazing, and I just love to see how much you put into this. It's like this is so you're a saint. I
Well,
love it. And all of us should appreciate the level of work that you've put into this. You know, it's just it's incredible to me.
it's like a hunger. You're hungry. People get hungry for food. I'm hungry for obscure tales like that, and I'm not happy until they find out where it is.
Right. Well, clearly, obviously.
You
And so
go to
let's
the ends of the earth to find it. Obviously, in that case,
clearly. And so let's talk about this next. I'm going to show this.
Okay, yeah, this is another favorite tale, which I don't think has been really fleshed out very much. Uh, it's a Project Blue Book record card, so this is a case in Project Blue Book. There's a lot of cases in Project Blue Book that are of interest, and most of them are explainable. But this one caught my eye because of something I came across later. But I dug the original information out here. It was an incident uh, over Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And it happened on February 1st, 1954. And it involved a balloon launch. At that time, Skyhook balloons uh, were being used for scientific research often, besides military applications. So here, they were used for cosmic ray research. They could go very high and be up in above the atmosphere, most of the atmosphere, and collect data on something like cosmic rays, where usually they're diverted or they can't get to the ground very easily, but up in the air they can register very well, and they move super fast. Uh, Coming into the earth. It's just an area of research that at that time wasn't as well understood as they would like. So they found skyhooks to be uh, a good way to loft scientific experiments up into the air so that they could detect cosmic rays and analyze them. So in this case, the balloon was launched from Texas, and the prevailing winds would take it across the South, Louisiana, Alabama. I tried to check to see if there were sightings of UFOs, because that's what Charlie Moore told me one time. They would track balloons by tracking UFO reports. They were usually the balloons. So I did find one report in Mobile, Alabama, which appeared to be this balloon. But anyway, over Tuscaloosa, and as the person says here, he was one of the witnesses. Uh, he was in a chase plane when they sent skyhooks up. Uh, they wanted to monitor the experiment, and uh, after the experiment was concluded, the instrument package would be released on a parachute from the balloon, so that the balloon wouldn't take it out to sea and drop the package in the water. So the plane was there to do that. It was a small aircraft. And there were two people on board, the pilot and a spotter. So they had noticed something odd over Tuscaloosa, that something appeared to come under the balloon. These funny lights. And this is daylight, so the lights must have been quite bright. Um, and he describes it here in the as Blue Book did, but he described it just a very peculiar approach of multiple objects to the bottom of the balloon and kind of hanging around there.
Wow.
So there's a little patch there that was in the original Blue Book form. I don't know why they did that, but a little hard to read. But it continues the narrative about it, and can probably move along to the next one. Years later, many years later, when I was doing newspaper research, I came across a story in Minnesota. Just looking for, a usual term I put in, flying saucers, and I harvest whatever came out of those searches. And this is one of them. And I'm looking at it and I'm saying, oh, that's something new and different. But as I read it, I realized that this was related to that Blue Book story. And this is the pilot, a fellow named Glenn Hovland, who was a very highly respected pilot in that area. His part of his duties during that time was to monitor balloons, follow them. He was skilled at it, so he did this with other experiments. But in this case, he's talking about a UFO sighting that he had with a particular balloon, and what he was describing was the February 1st Tuscaloosa balloon launch, and he's independently telling what happened in his own words to this newspaper. This is completely aside from Blue Book. Blue Book had nothing to do with it. This is came out a long time after the fact. So you can see them there, and you can see what a Skyhook looks like. I think a lot of your listeners probably know what they are and how they appeared. They're very, very large balloons. And in this particular case, it carried an instrument package, there was a stack of photographic plates that when cosmic rays would hit the plates would register how far in the rays would penetrate through that thick stack and give some useful information on how they were, what speeds they came in, and what they consisted of. So uh, there were certain scientists that specialized in cosmic ray research. In this case, it was a scientist named Marcel Shine, and this was his experiment. Now, given that skyhooks were military, it was being run by the Navy. The Navy was in control of the balloon.
Mm-hmm. And let me
And
know
they,
when you want me to move on, Barry.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I can. Yeah, this is still more. It's still interesting
wow.
how this developed.
Yeah.
So the Navy had it, and when the incident happened, it went to Project Blue Book, but there was nothing from the Navy. And I think you can put the next one up. Oh, that's the second part of the article.
Okay.
Yeah, just skip over that. Okay. Um, the report was filed with Blue Book, and somehow Blue Book received this image. Now, this image is not really good. I mean, it's crude, but I think that's due to the fact that it was probably a photo print that was reproduced too many times. And Blue Book ended up with the multi-generation photocopy, which isn't ideal. Um, this is said to show what the balloon saw from a downward-facing camera when these objects came about. And it looks like it's a sort of a horseshoe-shaped array of about, what, I don't know, six, 7 objects or so, roughly. It's hard to tell which are speckles and which are the images of the objects, but that's the image. I wish there could have been a better one, but there isn't. And I tried to work with it and enhance it without altering it at all. I did my best, but that's all you can get out of it.
Wow.
So there's the image from the Skyhook. Uh, in the previous clipping, Hovland said that he took photographs. Had nothing to do with the balloon. He took his own photographs and sent them in. And there's no accounting for what happened to the photos that he took. They're gone. I don't know whether they might have been directed to and all, but the Navy picture somehow got back to Blue Book. Through what means? Again, I don't know, because it's not clear from the file what happened. The file is, aside from the report form that Hovland had sent in along with his spotter, that's all there was. There was nothing from the Navy. So the one image is lost, the other image is poor. And yet we didn't hear anything about this story involving the pilot giving such detail about his end of it beyond the original report form, that it raised some interesting questions. You had strange objects flying near a balloon experiment that involved cosmic rays. Were these objects energetic somehow? Could they have affected the experiment by radiant energy or some such thing that might have been there? It doesn't seem to have been a consideration by anyone that sighting and the pilot's confirmation had any role at all in the Skyhook and the experiment with it, because that all the information apparently went to the Navy, and they would not provide any more background, even to the Air Force. They just didn't make it available. Um, And I think the topper is, if you can probably move along here, this is part of the report form that the spotter sent in. Now, uh, they didn't have the photos at that time. They were mailed into the Air Force. So he's drawing what he saw near the balloon, and if you look at it, you can see sort of rough similarity to what's shown in the photos. It's sort of a curved array of multiple objects. So he's backing up what the balloon photo showed later on, which apparently he hadn't seen. So you can probably go on from there. The thing about the experiment on the balloon was that it resulted in a major scientific discovery. Shine's research, as you can see here, new particle discovered with an energy of 10 million billion volts. At that time, it was pretty significant discovery. It was in all the newspapers, news magazines at the time. But nothing, absolutely nothing, is mentioned of a UFO incident involving the balloon, or whether it had any bearing on the results coming out of that. It was totally ignored. Um, Shine died in 1960, so he never really testified to anyone as to whether he knew anything about the UFO incident or not. It didn't seem like he would, from everything he said about the story, but yet there's something else. If just move along. Okay, this is the paper written up on the experiment for Physical Review magazine, or a journal, because that's one of the top physics journals in the world. Still is. But the experiment is discussed here, and I don't know if I still have. Yeah, I have a copy of it here, so I can't read it on the screen there. It's too small,
I
but
know, I'm sorry about
it's all
that.
right. No, it's okay. Um, the paper starts out a narrow shower of pure photons at 100,000 feet. Very unusual new event consisting of a large number of individual electron pairs has been found in a stack consisting of 18 Ilford, as they described, flown in the Skyhook from Goodfellow Air Force Base. This is the very same experiment. And they thought the discovery was quite unusual. But further on in the paper, they said it should be noted, however, that this event had very remarkable features in that it consists of about 20 photons with no electrons present. Such a phenomenon would appear to be incompatible with the production of these photons by any conventional electromagnetic process. So then, denoting this is kind of an odd discovery. But again, no mention at all of the strange objects that flew near the balloon, and really not leaving any information as to what effect that might have had on the balloon itself. They seemed to be close enough. They were photographed, and the spotter plane saw them from a distance. But
Wow.
that went down as a major scientific discovery. It involved UFOs, but nobody knows about it.
And that's so fascinating. That's why I love like talking to you, because I mean, every time I talk to you, there's something there that nobody's heard about. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do, in the UFO, wow,
Yeah,
whatever,
well,
this
I mean, again,
community. It's like, look, I mean, there's so much more to focus on besides Roswell, besides Rendlesham, besides, all of these things that are just making money for a lot of
yeah.
people. There are so many things, and
Well,
that
something
you've
like
just
that
given.
fascinates me. I
Right,
just find that interesting. It's a scientific puzzle, perhaps. It's not to say it's alien
right.
or other dimensions or anything like that. It's just a puzzling incident that may have had some effect on a major scientific discovery in the past, but it's just not clear how or if. a lot of questions there that aren't resolved. As much information as exists on the experiment and the people's description of what happened there, we probably still don't have enough to draw any hard conclusions. But yet it's a puzzle. It's a puzzle with pieces. I want to know what the whole picture shows, but we only have some pieces.
But I mean, you've got more pieces and more evidence for some of for some of these, things that you're looking into than most people have. I mean, after 30 years of creating specific narratives.
Well, well, in a way, I've been working on it for 58 years.
Right.
So in that time, you're liable to pick up more information than someone that's been in it 30 years or 20 years. It's just, you need a lot of time to tackle some of these issues and see what's out there. I just, it's energetic to be able to do something like that because you feel like you're filling in gaps in our knowledge about odd events that may be helpful in the future.
I think that's so cool. And I mean, when I talk to you, you've got so many areas of interest. And I think just, I mean, we were talking about Phil Klass the other day and his first book,
Hmm.
talking and give us a little background about that and some of Klass's
Yeah.
thoughts on things.
Well, with the mid '60s UFO activity, the swamp gas era, and there was a fair amount of activity after that uh, sighting wave throughout 1966 into '67 and '68. Phil Klass had written for Aviation Week and Space Technology, and he after watching all this information, came up with an idea that perhaps plasmas could be invoked as a cause for UFO reports. Not aliens, just electrical plasmas that can form around power lines in various places. There's a history of UFO incidents involving sightings near power lines,
Hmm.
glowing blobs of light that startled people. So Klass thought that was a valid explanation for most reports. He thought it applied to just about everything on UFOs, and his first book dealt with that. UFOs identified. On the front cover, you can see a photo that was taken in Canada in 1956, and it was taken by a Canadian pilot who spotted this. Now, I'd like to know more about that as a sighting report, but it was widely reproduced, and the reason Klass picked it was because it resembled a big blob of light in a thunderstorm. There was thunderclouds all around, so he felt that fed into his theory about UFOs.
Hmm.
So he wrote that up and all, and I think that the problem was he became quite renowned for it. But the problem was that he tried to explain too much with that theory. Even Donald Menzel criticized him for going too far. So at that point, Klass pulled back, endorsing that. He didn't discard it, but he just didn't use it to apply to everything. And he resorted to considering hoaxes and mistaken sighting reports, but hoaxes became a lot more prominent in his thinking than plasma balls. And
Wow.
I think that was the time when a lot of UFO researchers perceived him as being Mr. Nasty because he had gotten into some pretty vivid fights with people over interpreting sighting reports. So that's where that book came from. It was his first book, but he fine-tuned his information after that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, but I think sometimes he gets such a bad rap from people, and he was, he did take on, James McDonald and things like that,
Oh
and it
yeah, yeah.
could be pretty interesting. But
He had some wild battles with people, and he turned a lot of people off. He was sometimes caustic, and justifiably so. The people arguing with him just didn't want to talk to him anymore because he did become that caustic. And I think towards the end of the 1990s, he began to pull back and not be like he had been during the 70s and 80s, with being way too critical. I know at various points, uh, there was a sort of a college lecture circuit going on with UFO people. They would go around and give presentations on the latest sightings, and people like Stanton Friedman, Robert Hastings would do this. And uh, one unfortunate thing that Klass would do, he was so virulent about debunking the subject that he resorted to contacting colleges who had scheduled uh, UFO lectures to tell them to cancel those lectures because they were spreading pseudoscience. They were no good, and people shouldn't pay attention to them. And he was doing that underhandedly. He was sending letters to the universities unbeknownst to the other lecturers. So that tactics like that didn't set well with people. But yeah, one thing I had encountered with Klass, I had gone to Washington, D.C. around 1992, mainly to do research at the Library of Congress. And he was in the area, so I decided to see if I could visit him, pop over. I gave warning before I went to Washington that I'd be in the area. So I called him up. Uh, and I may have told you this story before, but
No, I love hearing it.
yeah,
I don't
well,
think a lot of
yeah,
people listening have heard this, so
yeah. He called me to come over to his townhouse. So I went over, and he came to the door in his pajamas. And I said, "Did I wake you up?" And he said, "No, no, he had a cold. He wasn't feeling well." I said, "Well, I won't bother you then." "No, no, no, come on in." So he had me come on in, and he was gonna get dressed and go over to his private club, and we were gonna sit down and eat, have a little supper. So he put me in the study room with his dog. I had to mind his dog while he was dressing, and the dog was great, the cutest little thing you could imagine, and you wouldn't believe how he slobbered over that dog. Little itsy bitsy cutesy. You hear that from Phil Klass. It's like
right.
eye opening. But that's the way he was with the animal. So he went over to the club, and we were eating and all, and just chatting about different things that were going on at the time. And at one point, I asked him a question. I said, "Why are you in this? Why do you persist? Because you clearly you don't think there's anything to it." And well, he said just one thing. He says, "I'm hooked." That's it. That's all he said. "I'm hooked." He couldn't get away from the subject. He found it in a negative way fascinating. I think he enjoyed the dueling with people back and forth, and the getting him upset and probably snickering about it. He just enjoyed that. And
Pretty tame compared to what's going on Twitter now,
oh
so
yeah, it's quite a bit
that's
worse in some ways.
yeah, I mean, that was
Uh,
child's play compared to what we've got going on and
but
people
but
hiding behind
another thing
anonymity,
I asked him,
so
I asked him another thing that I thought was important too. I said, "Well, do you think this subject's worth preserving?" Because I had in my mind at the time about archiving and preservation. So I said, "Do you think this is worth it? I mean, there's no aliens as far as you're concerned." So I would have figured that he would say, "Nah, just don't bother with it. Just ignore it and sideline it." But just the opposite. He shocked me. He said, "No, no, no." He says, "I think it all should be preserved, right down to the crazy literature, the contactee stuff, all of it." He says because uh, sociologists, anthropologists, psychologists would find this fascinating, and they would want to be able to consult all of the information on it, by which to draw conclusions. So Phil Klass was an ardent advocate of archiving and preservation, of all people. Strange, but that's how he felt.
well, I think it's always interesting to hear different sides of, people's stories because we all have, our own experiences. And I know that James Clarkson is in talking about, his experience at a security at Seattle MUFON and things, and people have their opinions about him. But yet, I mean, I've got pictures of him sitting with Ann Druffel and different communications that they had over the years, and they were very friendly and respectful. And but everybody has their own experiences with people. Do you feel that he was, as we've heard a lot of times, that he was a paid disinformation agent?
Uh, I didn't really get that impression. Not only because I didn't have any evidence of it, I didn't have a paycheck from the CIA to him or anything like that. He was working with an entity that was somewhat beholding to government, Aviation Week and Space Technology. So yeah, he got his paycheck from them, and they may have had government contacts that did a lot of influencing. But him himself, I don't think so. I just don't get the impression. I thought he was so into the topic as an individual, the ins and outs of it, and it was just fun to him to be able to go at people and argue and debate and so on. He seemed to enjoy that very much. So I can't say for sure whether he was paid by someone, but I just don't get that impression
Interesting. When you've
from
done
interacting with him.
Right, right. You've done, I mean, Lord knows you've got you've looked at the history of the subject, and you have different information. I think it is interesting, and that kind of brings up uh, another point. And James, thank you for bringing this up. But I mean, a lot of times when somebody is asking questions, or they're not going with a specific narrative, they could potentially be labeled as a disinformation agent. I remember a few years ago, I was labeled part of the Dark Cabal by Corey Good and David Wilcox. And I mean, I guess,
Hmm.
in hindsight, that's a good thing. I've been, accused of working for Bigelow, which clearly he's not paying me enough if that's the case.
Well, not anymore. If he did it one time, he cut
Right.
you off at some point.
Right. Well, unless we're doing the good cop, bad cop thing. But and so I think it is interesting, how to, and there are people that are genuinely disinformation agents. I mean, there are people that, this is an interesting topic, and I think there is a need to steer a narrative.
Hmm.
But, how do you figure out who that is, and how do you figure out, like, if this is just somebody's obsession?
Well, that's
Um,
that's a challenge. I mean, to figure out who's doing what to who, and you can speculate about that, but if a disinformation person is engaging someone, it's going to be probably on the more of the strange aspects of the subject to try to send them in directions that aren't as serious. If there's serious consideration within government about UFOs and they don't want amateur ufologists around, they'll just tell them a crazy story and they'll go chasing after that and get rid of them. I think that's plausible. But as far as disinformation and serious aspects of the stuff, I'd written Clear Intent along with Larry Fawcett years ago, and a key part of that was trying to figure out uh, what was genuine and what was disinformation, if it existed at the time. And my criteria for that was to get paperwork from government agencies and make sure that they came from agencies instead of through anonymous sources, which was a growing concern at the time, because I thought relying on anonymous sources would water down what we were doing and negate the credible stuff we were getting. The credible stuff we had was to me sensational, but probably not as sensational as what ufologists are commonly used to as really big crazy stories. We wanted more serious but probably more sedate data as a balance to that. And the disinformation probably could have come out as the hoaxes that we were processing at the time. There was a wave of hoaxing in the late 70s, early 80s that I think probably culminated during that time frame in MJ12, which was the biggest hoax at the time. And I use hoax without reservation. There's no doubt it's a hoax, to me, because you just can't establish something like that as genuine through credible sources. Every last government source that we had didn't take that seriously. And when we were assured that some government people did take it seriously, it couldn't be documented. I remember Lynn Stringfield telling me one time after I asked him about sources he claimed to have like half a dozen people who verified MJ12, and I asked him, well, can you give a little more detail on that? And he said no. I said, no, why not? Well, because he was promised a secrecy. Well, okay, then why mention it at all? If it's a secret thing that you couldn't talk about, don't even talk about it. But he didn't give in on that. He just went on to other topics, and he wouldn't elaborate on it. So it was a useless lead to me. Couldn't do anything with it. Len says people verified MJ12, but I can't say why or how or anything about it or who. So what can you do with it? Nothing. That's maybe disinformation. Now he was being. I'm not saying he did it, but he could have been used to spread disinformation to get me to say, well, these guys said MJ12 was real, therefore I changed my mind. I wasn't going to change my mind on that basis. So it falls on deaf ears if it's disinformation.
And so, I mean, there are people that still believe MJ12 is something that's factual, even though you spent more than anyone 10 years digging into things and asking questions and trying to hold people's feet to the fire on this. I mean, what would you say if somebody was, perhaps like taking the viewpoint that you're a disinformation agent and that what Stanton Friedman said about MJ12 is the gospel? How would you
Oh,
respond to
I
that?
was accused of that. Yeah, I worked for the post office, and people were spreading rumors at the time that I was on the government payroll. Well, yeah, I was. I worked for the post office. They didn't provide that bit of information. I had to fill that in and tell people, yeah, well, that's the government check because it's my job. It's the post office, not the CIA. And I didn't like that tactic anyway. That saying that I was getting a government check, because that implies you're getting something nefarious from some intelligence group and all. They didn't elaborate on that sufficiently to make it clear. I think that may have been intentional to try to make me look bad, but it didn't go very far. I just brushed it off, and anybody I knew thought it was ridiculous.
And so, what would you say to people, because people genuinely love Stanton, and I mean
Hmm.
I met him, and I think I enjoyed my interactions with him. What would you say about the about his involvement with MJ12, and what
Yeah.
were
Well, there were, yeah, I mentioned before, uh, there were two Stanton Friedmans, I thought. One prior to the 1980s, where he was the cosmic Watergate crusader and wanted to end the cover up, and he wanted to use government documents to end the cover up, and that was a reasonable thing to do at the time because FOIA was new, and we were getting a lot of brand new information, brand new old information out of government to show that they were withholding a lot of stuff that they wouldn't acknowledge previously. They essentially lied when they said, "Well, Blue Book was it. There was nothing else." It was complete garbage. Nothing to it because we proved that with clear intent. Uh, did it prove UFOs as alien? No, it didn't. But that wasn't the point. The point was that I think we did prove that information was withheld, and it was withheld in large amounts. So once we get it, if we can get it, we'll get it out there, and people can draw conclusions about it. At the time, I did clear intent. I drew some conclusions. I was very reluctant to do that because the publisher wanted it. I'm not inclined to draw hard conclusions about data like that. As much as it was voluminous, it wasn't detailed enough to direct any particular answer to it. So uh, since then, I think I had clarified my views on the subject and all, and not nearly so entertaining of some of the more exotic aspects of the subject, because I've seen too much nonsense going on that altered information that I thought was credible, but turned out not to be credible in the long run. So, I can probably be regarded as perhaps middle of the road, if not on the cautious side of interpreting the phenomenon as something unusual. I think there's answers to vast majority of it, but not everything. And that may be due to the fact that we need more information about those few remaining that can steer a narrative on them. It's, to me, the best you can say is that, well, there were unknown reports. Don't know what they are. They're just unknown. And that's as far as I want to go with it now. I don't like the crazy speculation and invoking time travelers and other dimensions and all of that. It's fun, but it's uh, hardly convincing.
And so, I mean, what do you think when, I mean, obviously we've seen, and I mentioned this earlier in the show, and I've mentioned this on different shows, but it's, you see a subject where you've got the people that are inserting kind of the conspiracy theories. We're sending people to FEMA camps where, the apocalypse is coming, all of these things. And you've got this side to this where right now, especially, again, you've got this religious revival where it's angelic or demonic and things like that. And you've got, like with Skinwalker Ranch, the hitchhiker effect, and bad things are following you home and things. I
Oh,
mean, it's,
don't get me off on the hitchhiker effect. I like to call it anomaly disease.
yes, let's get you off on that. I think that'd be a great way to end the show.
Well, I mean, I've seen a paper offered up by Colm Kelleher on that recently, and I think Edge Science SCU puts it out, and he expounded on it and cited examples of what he felt uh, was evidence of that. And to me, it, it it would have been far more credible to get a team of doctors to sit down and look at that information and give opinions on the examples that were given, and come to some sort of a medical assessment, because it's being called something within people, within their being, that's spreading like a disease. It attaches itself and moves along like a parasite. And I mean, there's no mechanism describing how that happens. It's just suggested that it happens. But to make something like that factual, you have to have a mechanism, a machine that shows how that works. And you've got to bring in lots of doctors to look at it and
Wait,
give
I thought Kit Green.
varying viewpoints on it.
I thought Kit Green. I thought Gary Nolan. What?
Well, are they candid about everything they're into?
Not really. No, no.
It needs to be out in the open. It needs to be peer reviewed. It needs to be written up in no withholding information except for the obvious medical privacy issues. But the medical aspects of it itself have to be explored, and it really hasn't been done.
No, but I mean, this has been the great, myth. Oh, decade up. Yeah, I mean, for a long, long time. Oh, we've got all of these medical studies and, yada yada yada, and yet the people that are offering or are looking into those medical studies are really trained in specific areas that you would think, they would be utilizing when they're
Well,
looking at
yeah,
brain
yeah,
scans.
yeah,
I mean, I don't
yeah.
know. They're not. It's
Well,
definitely an
yeah.
interesting
I've
thing.
I've seen scientists and medical people within UFOs talking about things that it's not their field. They may be enthused about doing analysis, but considering if they're chemists and they're doing biology research in UFOs, I mean, that you need something better than that. They're a little out of their realm.
But yet we keep thinking just because they have a PhD or things like that they're qualified.
Oh,
And I mean,
yeah.
it was, yeah, I go back to the conference I was at a couple months ago, but near the ranch that
Mm,
shall not be named for fear of a lawsuit. But it's like, it's just you've got somebody saying, "Well, I was at the hospital when he had this brain injury and his head, separated from his scalp," and it's like, okay, and you're a physicist, you're what? I mean, like
mm.
your background isn't even in that, and so I just yeah, I mean, I think these are interesting questions, and I think, when you've got the anomaly disease or whatever, the hitchhiker, just like
Mm.
how many people could you say, okay, you're going to this ranch, dun dun dun. It's like you're this magician, and look into my eyes, and then you're going to have
Well,
something happen when you go home,
yeah.
and
Well, think about the implications of that. You go someplace, you pick up something that makes you go back home and see a werewolf. What there's a lot of gaps there that I'm not following. That gets to that point, and it's not explained very clearly. It's explained as paranormal.
right.
Well, that's no explanation. It's almost as if something paranormal in it is in and of itself an explanation. It's not. You need much more than that to establish whether that's real or not.
Well, and then, I mean, like the dino beavers, the magical frog, which I mean, the magical frog will be coming up at some
Well,
some
yeah,
point. I've got
you
so
didn't
much.
even get into that tonight. You had some nice visuals there that
I did.
you
I
didn't get
did.
into.
I know. I mean, uh,
I think that needs to be broached as an important analysis. The eight alifrogs.
do, do you think I should
It's a new
play it?
species. Come on, let's look into it.
Do, should I play it?
Well, you probably don't have enough time now.
Okay.
Do it
Okay.
next week. Next week.
Oh dear. Okay. Yes. So much good
You don't want to
information.
waste those graphics.
Yes, those graphics are amazing, and the interview of the magical frog is just something. As you've seen it firsthand, it's like there's so
Magical
much.
that's the term that was used to a magical
It,
frog.
it was a magical frog,
Uh, okay.
and and just like the dino beaver. I mean, I made what where
Well, I still want to know what I'm going to call it instead of a dino beaver because it seems to piss people off that it's called a dino beaver. But I don't know what else to call it. So
what are people saying like when they're mad that you're calling it a dino beaver? What respectful terminology are you supposed to
it's
use?
disrespect. They call it
Okay.
disrespect. But
Hmm.
if you say something's a like a dinosaur and it looks like a beaver, what are you supposed to say?
What are they saying that we should say?
They're not saying.
Oh,
They're not saying. They're just
oh,
criticizing you for calling it that
oh,
and not offering up their own uh, scientific term for it.
oh. Well, that could be a stretch for them. I'm not quite sure if
Damn. This what aggravates me about what goes on in this subject. It's
Beavisaurus is it a
frivolous debate over things that you shouldn't even get into.
I mean,
Waste time.
it's just like when you look at this from an outside, granted I was, I think we all get into this and we're swept up and then we're like, "Oh my God, there's this magical floating beaver." I mean, whatever. I mean, it's like you get
If you're worried about the consequences of reporting something like that, you shouldn't say anything at all until you have something more concrete to get into with it because it just embarrasses you. I saw a thing that looked like a beaver and a dinosaur. Okay, prove it. I can't.
But people are still like literally freaking going with this. It's like, oh no, these
Yeah,
people are
yeah.
really nice. What they said is true. You can't verify
I
it, but
mean,
he's nice,
I
and
mean
so
that's a case where restraint is called for in the enthusiasm for telling really lurid tales about this, trying to prove the sensational nature of it. You go overboard, and then you get yourself into a trap where you can't establish the credibility of what you're saying.
right, right. Well, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like just it's. I mean, I don't even know where to go. There's just really the magical frogs and shape-shifting werewolves and
Well, I'm expecting to hear more about that, more crazy animals
well,
surfacing.
I think there's I'm only sure oh, I like I said, I'm looking forward to at some point in time putting out the over I mean almost worth a decade's worth of interviews that I've done with various researchers and people in the community and people involved in specific projects and things, and it's like I think when that gets put out there, it'll be you have to sit back and
Okay.
go,
Is
what?
there one thing on Skinwalker Ranch that you're sitting on and you haven't even gotten into yet?
Me?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Oh, that there's a cagey answer.
Cagey.
Cagey.
Completely. It is cagey. Wily, excuse me,
Well,
it's
wait a minute.
wily.
Let me rephrase that. Kind of slimy.
Slimy malcontent.
Slimy
Ba-dum-bum.
malcontent. Yeah,
Just wait for the t-shirt.
that's
Slimy
evasive,
malcontent.
slippery.
I know. I'm keeping the data transparent
That
behind my
doesn't
kimono. Ooh,
that doesn't happen in this subject. Sliminess and
I know.
slipperiness. You know,
Gosh.
there's none of
Eh,
that here, and you've got to pony up now.
I will definitely pony up and yeah, I mean, it's
Okay, we'll be waiting,
well, I know we will be waiting, and you know what
and then you have to start with the Frogs
I do.
because there is something to be said about that.
And the Ouija boards and the
Hmm.
yeah, so much. But yeah, this will all make its way out. So I'm just, oh my Lord.
Yeah,
But
yeah. No, no, just I mean, just to emphasize with the Frog that not being frivolous here, there is new information on that. I heard it a couple of years ago, and there's new information that surfaced on it, describing what this I don't know phenomenon, crypto thing is all about.
yes,
But you'll reveal that maybe next week.
maybe next week. And
Hmm.
again, it's like this, there's so much to put forward. And yeah, which I will and I am. And yeah, I look forward to that. But it's, at the end of the day, I'm sure, I'm just bitter because I wasn't asked to be on a TV show that, whatever.
Well,
But
that's where the malcontent comes in. Yeah,
I know, I love it.
you're just mad because you weren't made a star.
Dang.
You're going to have
Sad.
to make your own way from now on. You're going to
Oh,
have to plow the alleys of Hollywood.
I know. That's unfortunate. Slimy Malcontent. Oop. Wait.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mario. Those t-shirts literally will be available and we are all going to be donning
Is that for
Slimy
real?
Malcontent. Well, Mario made up the graphic. And so I'm going to get the
Okay.
shirts printed. Yes, baby.
Well, that'd be a nice shirt for people to buy.
Slimy
Slimy malcontent. I think a
Malcontent.
lot of us would wear it.
Okay. Are you guys down? Seriously, I'm totally
Yeah.
down. Thank you,
Why not?
Mario. Hey, everybody's gonna be wearing it. We're gonna be sporting that. So anyway,
It,
thank
it,
you, Barry, for just this is fun. And I think this is just so needed. And thanks, Peter. I'm so sorry for not asking specific questions, you guys. I'm sorry. It's hard to try to moderate chat and then ask questions and then run defense. And I'm glad that Barry is patient. I'm glad all of you are patient. I'm glad I've got Mario helping me behind the scenes. And so look for slimy malcontent. And then also definitely, I mean, go to Barry's website, Greenwood Archives .org. And you've got so much on there with Just Cause, and you've got all of
yeah.
your, I was on there
A
today.
lot of references and leads to information that the important thing is a lot of it is been acquired already. It's not talked about, but we don't have copies of anything. We do have copies.
Here's Tinker.
Oh, there we go. Tinker.
Tinker. Mufasa is taking a break. Oh, there's Honey, but they're being very good tonight. So I have to say, here's Tinker.
All right. Good dog.
Slimy malcontent. But anyway, thank you so much, and thanks you guys, and I appreciate it. So you guys take care, and thanks, Barry.
You're welcome.
We will hang out next week, and I look forward. And actually, next week, if all goes as planned, I'm going to be bringing on a guest that might shock some of you, especially
Oh
given
my.
I know, especially given our differences of opinion over the years and some kind of controversial things that have happened. But hopefully, if that goes off, that will be a great show. I look forward to it. And I want to thank all of you for your donations tonight, your super stickers. I want to thank all of my Patreons for making monthly donations to the show, and all of the people that are out there asking good questions and making sure that we're not being bullied or intimidated by people that are hiding behind keyboards that have ulterior motives and things. I think you guys rock. So thank you, Barry. You guys have a wonderful weekend, and if all goes as planned and I can actually do the outro, this will be the seventh sign of the apocalypse. And so I'm glad I'm doing my food storage. That's all I can say.
Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of scary.
Can't wait. I'll tune in.
Thank you. Bye,
You'll
you guys.
have one.
That's good. Thank you. I'll see you guys next week. Thanks, Barry.